A dry crack split the dawn as Clara Hayes drove a splintered fence post deep into the parched earth of Red Mesa Ranch. The sound echoed across the empty corrals, mingling with the whisper of dust motes dancing in the pale light. In that instant, Clara's heart tightened. Another barrier set against the relentless claim of creditors who measure her worth by land deeds and cold coin. Her hands, callous and steady from years of solitary toil, betrayed no tremor, yet her chest carried the weight of every loss since her husband's tumble from the supply wagon 2 winters past. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if the story touches your heart, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've got something extra special saved just for you. Clara paused to catch her breath, glancing across the rugged expanse where saguaros and stunted mesquite clustered like survivors of harsher days. Behind her, little Joey, her only kin now, watched with wide, curious eyes. At 7, he was lean and sun-kissed, his small frame already marked by frontier hardship. Clara's voice, as gentle as a spent breeze, called him forward. "Climb up, Joey. Help me nail the wire." Together, they worked in quiet companionship, a fragile thread of hope woven through the arid land. By mid-morning, the sun burned high and unrelenting. Clara brushed torn straw from her skirt and paused as the far ridge shimmered in heat waves. Among the dust and rock, a lone rider appeared, lean figure silhouetted against the horizon. She squinted, heart-catching. The man guided a stray calf back toward his neighbor's corral, his movements precise, confident. Clara recognized the silhouette of a cowboy who'd lent a hand to ranchers up and down the valley, but had never stopped at Red Mesa. A sliver of possibility touched her thoughts. Could this stranger say her ranch? Weeks earlier, she'd received the banker's letter. Settle your claim or lose your land. The words, scrawled in cold ink, felt like a noose tightening around her family's legacy. Red Mesa was all she had left of her marriage, a partnership of shared dreams cut short by tragedy. With only Joey and the unyielding land for company, Clara devised a desperate plan. A facsimile husband to ward off the banker's raids on her property. A husband, even a pretend one, carried legal weight that a lone widow could not. If she could recruit a man sturdy enough to stand by her door and stern enough to face down creditors, perhaps she could buy time and survival. Her mind returned to the figure on the ridge. She spurred her nag, Dusty, into a steady lope toward the neighboring homestead. The cowboy had corralled the stray with swift ease, throwing his lariat with practiced skill. Watching him work, Clara felt a strange pull, a mixture of admiration and wary calculation. When he mounted and turned Dusty's way, his dark eyes narrowed beneath a broad-brimmed hat. Straw-colored hair peeked from beneath the brim, and a faint sheen of sweat glistened on his cheekbone. Clara reined in alongside him, her heart pounding in the hush. "Morning," she called, voice firm though her stomach knotted with nerves. The cowboy tipped his hat, his expression neutral but polite. "Mornin'," he replied. His voice was low, tempered like aged whiskey. "Name's Tom Reed. I reckon you must be Miss Hayes." He spoke with a quiet certainty that fit his confident bearing. Clara dismounted, Dusty's flanks heaving and nostrils flared. Joey followed her lead, hanging close. "I am," she said. "Tom Reed. You're the one folks say can handle any trouble out here." She gestured to the far horizon, where clouds gathered in the distance. "I'm in a bit of a bind. Creditors calling in a debt that'll cost my ranch. Thought maybe I could hire help. Keep him in plain sight. Make the banker think twice about foreclosing on a married man's land." Tom's gaze drifted over the swaying grasses, then back to her. "A fake husband," he said softly, eyebrows lifted in measured surprise. "That's a tough gig, ma'am." He paused, boots planted firmly in the dust. "I help neighbors now and then, but pretending kin, that's a new one." His tone was neither mocking nor unkind, merely curious. Clara offered him a small, hopeful smile. "I can pay," she said, voice steady though her heart fluttered. "Wages, board, whatever you need." She added quickly, I've saved what I could. My husband left a few coins and a good mare. I'd be grateful for your help." She glanced down at Joey, who watched with cautious hope. "I just need someone to stand by my side when the banker rides in." Tom considered her words, sunlight glinting off the tarnished silver buckle of his spurs. In that moment, the valley held its breath. Even the distant hills seemed to pause, as if awaiting his reply. Joey, uncomfortably aware of the tension, tugged at Clara's skirt. She knelt to his level, murmuring reassurance. Then she rose, meeting Tom's gaze again. "Reckon I'm low on work these days," Tom said after a thoughtful pause, his voice quiet but firm. "Could use a place to stay and a purpose stronger than wandering. I accept your offer on one condition." He shifted his weight. "We do this my way. I ride as your husband in the light of day, but at night I sleep outside. I won't hide what I am." Clara drew in a breath, surprise and relief mingling in her chest. She nodded slowly. "Fair enough," she said, with the decision spoken aloud. The wind stirred as though the land itself exhaled. Dust motes swirled around them, settling again in the hush. Tom mounted smoothly, and Clara followed behind, her chest tight with anticipation. Joey climbed aboard Dusty, nestled between them. The trio set off down the rolling trail back toward Red Mesa Ranch, each gripping hope like a fragile anchor in the vast wilderness. As they crested the final ridge before home, Clara paused on her mount, shading her eyes with a gloved hand. There, on the far horizon, another silhouette loomed, a rider watching their approach with unnerving stillness. The figure lingered, half hidden by the crimson glow of autumn light. Clara's breath hitched. She exchanged a quick, tense glance with Tom, whose calm facade hardened ever so slightly. "Stay close," Tom murmured, his spurs glinting. "That ain't a neighbor come to bid farewell." Clara slid forward in her saddle, heart pounding like a time-worn drum. Beyond the ridge, the threat she sought to outwit had found her first, a silent promise that her gamble with fake husband was only the beginning of a far more treacherous dance. And as the sun sank toward the distant mountains, Clara realized that the cost of survival would demand more than a simple pretense. With that unsettling silhouette etched against the fading sky, the chapter of Red Mesa's precarious future closed in a breathless moment, marked by the quiet hum of hoofbeats and the unspoken question of what lay beyond the next ridge. A low creak echoed from the barn as dusk settled like a thin veil over Red Mesa Ranch, Arizona territory. The fading light clung to the weathered siding, casting long shadows across the dusty corral. Clara Hayes paused on the threshold, her heart pounding against the tight noose of worry that had strangled her since the banker's last demand. Beside her, Joey's wide eyes flicked toward the barn, uncertainty mirrored in his small frame. Tom Reed dismounted and strode toward the gate, his boots prodding the parched earth. Taking his lariat from the saddled bronc, he moved with a quiet confidence that belied the ghosts of his past. As he tightened a plank and secured a broken latch, the wind drifted through torn boards, carrying the scent of sweat and cedar. Clara watched him, silent, determined, and felt a flicker of something she hadn't dared to name. Hope. Inside the barn, the evening air was thick with the musk of hay and the soft murmur of horses shifting on straw. Tom's hands, callous yet deft, worked to replace a splintered beam. He measured twice, his gaze distant, as though recalling lines and angles from a time when surveyor's stakes had defined his world. The barn's groan of relief under his careful repair was a quiet victory against the disrepair that threatened her home. Clara, carrying a worn writing desk from the cabin, settled it just outside the barn's shadow. She unrolled a half-burned candle, the flame flickering like a small sun in her callous palm. With deliberate pen strokes, she began drafting her letter to the banker, a missive demanding time, pledging payment, staking her claim as a widow intent on saving her son's inheritance. Each word was a careful lariat thrown into the thick tangle of red tape and creditors' threats. Her act of agency, a testament to the strength that had carried her through widowhood. Joey, bundled in his homespun jacket, shuffled over and pressed a small harmonica into Tom's hand. "Teach me a song," he pleaded, voice soft as a wind. Tom paused, lifting his gaze from the beam he had just secured. The worn instrument felt foreign to him, an echo of childhood pleasures long buried. Yet he lowered himself beside the boy and coaxed a trembling note from the reeds. Joey's face lit with surprise, and soon they were playing a simple lullaby, soft, wavering, yet full of comfort in the settling dark. Clara watched the scene, her pen still poised above paper. The melody floated across the corral, each note a fragile thread of normalcy. For a moment, the weight of her creditor's threat seemed less pressing than the stoic tenderness of a cowboy teaching a pause in the world's cruelty. But as the lullaby drifted away, a distant sound, a faint stamp of hoof, tugged her gaze back to the ridge. There in the half-light, fresh tracks marred the smooth sweep of the plains, deliberate, firm, and closing fast. The bank scout, no doubt, riding confirmed she could not pay. Clara's chest tightened, the noose of debt squeezing anew. She rose, folded her letter in slow deliberation. "They're near," she murmured, just loud enough for Tom to hear. Tom straightened, harmonica tucked in his coat pocket, his eyes, shadowed by the brim of his hat, flicked to Clara. "Reckon I'll stand guard," he said quietly. His voice held no boast, only the calm resolve of a man who'd faced storms both natural and man-made. Clara tucked the letter into her bodice, its edges soft against a homespun cloth. She slipped a worn scarf, a keepsake from her late husband, around her neck and adjusted it with gentle hands. The scarf, a faded ribbon of faded love, now lay half-protected under her collar. Its presence grounded her, reminding her what was at stake. Her son, the ranch, and the fragile possibility of partnership with this enigmatic cowboy. The sun dipped entirely below the distant mesas, and the lantern Clara lit at the cabin's door cast a golden glow across the ridge. Its flame danced in the gathering night, a beacon of defiance against the encroaching darkness. From that circle of light came the soft, measured footfalls of Tom moving to the gate, and Joey trailing close behind, clutching his harmonica as though it were a talisman against fear. Clara took a steadying breath, her silhouette framed by the lamplight. The night's tasks lay before her. Draft the final lines of her letter, fortify the barn against unwanted guests, and face down the rider who bore the banker's seal. Yet in that pale glow, she felt strengthened by the quiet companionship of her makeshift family. Her chair scraped softly as she rose, resolute. On the ridge, the dust kicked up again, hoofbeats drawing nearer, deliberate and unwavering. Clara's hand tightened on the scarf, and she squared her shoulders. "We stand together," she whispered to Tom, who nodded grimly. Joey, his small face serious, pressed his palm to the stable door, ready to lock them out or hold them tight as needed. As the first horseman came into view, the lantern's light flickered, lending a momentary hesitation to the night. Clara's letter, clutched in one hand, remained unwritten in part, the final lines yet to be struck. The barn's creak, the horse's approach, the lantern glow on the ridge, these formed the prelude to a negotiation that could save or shatter her world. In the final hush before the confrontation, the wind cutting like a blade across the corral, Clara thought of her husband's soft laughter in gentler times and of the promise she had made at his grave, to protect their child and the land that had been their shared dream. Now, under the vast, indifferent desert sky, she met Tom's calm gaze. In the space between lantern light and encroaching hoofbeats, the silent pact was sealed, that they would fight this threat together with wit, courage, and the flickering hope of a fake marriage contract that might become more than just paper. And as the dust swirled at the crest of the ridge, the first silhouette of the creditor's rider paused in the lantern glow, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. The next moment would decide whether Clara's gambit to save Red Mesa would succeed, or whether the land she loved would once again slip through her grasp. Thus, with the lullaby's echo fading and the threat's hoofbeats growing louder, the true test of Clara Hayes' desperation and Tom Reed's purpose began, each beat of their hearts a testament to resilience in the arid, unyielding frontier. A sharp wind sliced through the ridge as dawn broke, flaying the darkness from the Arizona sky in cruel, cold gusts. The sun, a pale halo cresting the distant mesa, threw long shadows across Red Mesa Ranch's creaking barn. Clara Hayes, hands dusted with straw and resolve, stood at the edge of the corral, watching the first visit of the day. Her doom delivered on horseback. From the ridge rode the creditor scout, a lean man in a dark duster and high-creased hat, dust swirling about his spurs. He guided his horse to a halt at the rustic gate, rein slack but eyes hard. Without dismounting, he spat curtly, "Morning, ma'am. The banker's patience runs thin. We're here to settle your account, now." His words, sharp as flint, cut through Clara's carefully woven hope. Clara lifted her chin, voice steady as she replied, "I reckon I've earned a bit of time. My son and I will gather the funds." She folded her arms against the wind, drawing strength from necessity. The scout's horse stamped impatiently, a punctuation to his impatience. Before the scout could press further, Tom Reed stepped forward from the barn's shadow, boots crunching on gravel. His expression was guarded, yet his gaze was steadfast. "This land," he said quietly, "was surveyed twice by my own hand, for the territorial records and for your bank's files. There's a dispute over boundary markers that favors you only on paper." He tipped his hat, revealing the surveyor's stake behind his ear, a secret he had kept since his arrival. The scout's eyes flickered with surprise. "Surveyor, are you?" he snapped. "Then explain this," he demanded, forcing the trot toward a rusted metal box Clara had placed on the fence rail. Inside lay Tom's well-worn field notes, sketches of stakes, measurement log, and landmarks, now contradicting the bank's claim. Clara seized a fresh plank to block a corral rail. "My husband and I worked this land for years by those markers," she said. "Tom's survey shows the bank's deeds creep onto our pasture by at least 20 feet. Those acres feed my son. They're not yours." She slid the plank securely, each strike of the hammer a heartbeat of defiance. The scout's scowl deepened. "Ain't true," he growled, spurring his horse forward. "Your proof's flawed, you'll see." He raised a leather-bound ledger, snapped with brass clasps. "This here ledger holds your debt, signed by your own hand, Ma Hayes." His accusation hung in the crisp air. Clara's pulse thundered, but she summoned her calm. "I'll review it under honest light," she said, "but you'll not foreclose on a lie." She turned to Joey, who hovered with anxious eyes. "Joey, get to the barn," she instructed. "See if you find any tracks around the back." The boy scrambled to obey, the echo of his boots a soft metronome of fear and courage. Moments later, he returned, face pale. "Ma! Tracks! Fresh hoof prints right by the north door. Someone's been circling the barn." His voice, small yet urgent, revealed his intuition. Tom nodded. "They've got scouts," he murmured. "We'll need to lock that door and fast." He strode to the barn, gathering boards and rope. With practiced ease, he jammed a heavy plank across the door's frame and looped the rope around the latch, tension keeping the bolt sealed. Clara joined him, pressing the folds of her late husband's scarf, frayed but familiar, into the fence post as a marker of her land and her tenacity. The scarf's gentle cotton, mottled with sweat and faded by sun, served as a quiet metaphor for her own battered resolve. The scout, now dismounted and pacing, spat again. "You ain't buying time forever," he snarled. "We'll be back." His tone dripped with veiled threats, and he mounted with a swift motion. The distant echo of his horse's hooves faded into the vast wilderness, leaving behind a sharpened promise of return. Inside the barn, Clara and Tom exchanged a long, silent glance. The clash of wood and metal in their barricade mingled with the muffled cough of wind through broken slats. Joey padded inside, clutching his small harmonica. "I think they'll try to break in at night," he said softly. Clara knelt to him, brushing dust from his jacket. "We'll be ready," she whispered. "Together." The boy nodded, trust threading through his eyes. Night fell thicker than ink, and the ranch house lanterns flickered to life, casting golden halos against the blackened sky. Clara sat at her writing desk, candlelight dancing on parchment as she scribbled a response to the banker's ledger, an offer to renegotiate boundaries, backed by Tom's surveys and the scarf's subtle marking of her land. With each loop of her pen, she reclaimed a fragment of power. Tom watched from the window, eyes scanning the ridge. He recalled a dark chapter of his past. A surveyor's kin who had burned a colleague's homestead in a bitter dispute. He had tried to atone by helping Clara, by building fences rather than dividing fields. That memory, once a wound, now served as compass for his redemption. Outside, hoofbeats shattered the hush. A shout rang from the ridge, an urgent alarm that rent the quiet night. Clara blew out her candle, plunging the room into darkness. Beyond the thick timber walls, the threat had returned. With taut breath, she whispered, "They're here." Tom's hand found hers in the dark. Joey, half asleep by the hearth, stirred, eyes wide. In that shared moment, the barn's creaking boards and the menacing hoofbeats became their crucible, one that would test not only Clara's courage and Tom's resolve, but also the fragile alliance that had begun with a simple offer of pretend marriage. And as the distant shout echoed again, the lanterns flickered, casting dancing shadows across Clara's word-strewn desk, reminders of debt defiance and the unspoken promise that they would stand firm together against any storm a frontier might unleash. A cold dust settled over the ridge as shadows lengthened, draping Red Mesa Ranch in the muted blue of gathering night. The creaking barn door swung in the wind, groaning under its ancient hinges. Clara Hayes stood at the threshold, the hem of her homespun skirt brushing dust on the worn boards, and felt the familiar prickle of danger when its way beneath her skin. Tonight, the creditor had come not in quiet threats, but with official papers. Foreclosure notices stamped with the banker's seal. From the shadow of the barn, the creditor's scout emerged, ledger in hand and eyes narrowed beneath his hat. His spurs clicked like distant warnings as he approached. "Mrs. Hayes," he began in a voice as cold as a desert wind, "you've 30 days to produce payment. These foreclosure papers are final. Sign here, acknowledge loss of property, and the bank will handle the rest." Clara's grip tightened on the flank of a barrel, her knuckles pale against the weathered wood. She met the scout's steady gaze, voice low and firm. "Not so fast," she said. "You rely on those papers, but that land deed, its boundary was drawn by men who never saw Red Mesa in person." She turned to Tom Reed, who stood at her side in quiet support, the surveyor's stake peeking from his coat pocket. Tom stepped forward, boots crunching on gravel. "I surveyed this valley twice," he said, voice calm but carrying weight. "Does this ledger account for the arroyo I mapped, or the hidden wash that curls around your pasture? Here." He held out a folded chart sketched on oilskin, lines and measurements precise. "This survey shows the bank's claim overlapped your grazing by nearly 10 acres. Those are mine to protect, and Joey's to inherit." The scout's eyes darted from the survey to Clara's determined face. "That paper's just ink. Mine rests in the county recorder's office." He thumped the ledger. "These signatures hold real power." Clara unlocked the barn and stepped inside. Dust motes swirled in the last light as she beckoned Joey forward. The boy, wide-eyed but resolute, grasped a heavy plank torn from the corral fence. Together they barricaded the narrow doorway. Joey hammered with nimble determination, each strike a defiant heartbeat. The barn's creak softened as with met wood, reinforcing their stand. Outside, the scout tapped the ledger impatiently. "You're stalling," he said. "The bank's patience is threadbare." Clara held up her late husband's faded scarf, still draped about her neck, its edges frayed by wind and sorrow. "This scarf marked your kin's boundary stakes once," she said softly, voice tremulous but strong. "They claimed more land than they earned, and we lost a good friend to that greed." Her eyes glistened at Tom. "Your survey proves that. We won't bow to crooked claims." Tom's gaze darkened with pain. "My friend, Surveyor Banks, died in that same land dispute, ran off his horses trying to correct a crooked marker. He trusted your kin's word and paid for it." His confession echoed in the barn's stillness, the weight of brotherhood and guilt laid bare. The scout's scowl faltered. He folded the foreclosure papers, tucking them into his coat. It seems we have a misunderstanding, he said, voice rough with reluctant respect. Clara exchanged a look with Tom, then stepped to the barn's opening. Misunderstandings can be settled with truth, she offered. Sign here, she said, holding out a blank slip. Acknowledge that Red Mesa's boundary is as surveyed. Her hand, steady as the ground she stood on, waited for the scout's answer. He hesitated, glancing at the barricaded boards and the resolute faces behind them. Finally, he drew a pen from his coat pocket and, with a curt nod, scrawled his name across the paper. We'll stand by this, he muttered, passing the slip to Clara. Joey dropped his hammer, breathless. Clara folded the paper, keeping it close to her heart. Thank you, she said softly, aware that the creditor's forces would watch still, but knowing that tonight's battle was won without blood. In the growing hush, the scout retreated, leaving behind a rustle of his horse's departure and the distant twang of a gate swinging shut. Clara watched until his silhouette disappeared beneath the ridge, then turned to Tom and Joey. They stood together in the barn's fading glow, three unlikely comrades bound by necessity and newfound trust. Clara loosened the scarf around her neck, holding it up to the lantern's flicker one last time. This belonged to my husband, she said. Now it belongs to our victory. With a quiet gesture, she laid the scarf atop a worn saddle and stepped back, letting its soft fibers rest on the leather. The scarf, once a symbol of loss, now marked a turning point toward healing. Outside, the ranch hands emerged from the shadowed barn and joined them. Jed, the cook who had offered warm meals in times of scarcity, placed a hand on Clara's shoulder. You showed true grit, he murmured, pride and relief mingling in his voice. Clara nodded, exhaustion and triumph entwined in her shoulders. We done more than sign papers, she said. We stood our ground. Her gaze drifted to the dark ridge, where a final echo of hoofbeats lingered like a fading threat. They'll be back, she admitted softly. Tom's hand found hers, their shadows entwined on the barn's rough floor. Then we'll stand again, he replied, offering her a fierce smile. This time, with hope as our tether. In the lingering dusk, as the moon rose pale and watchful, the trio made their way to the corral's edge. Together, they began digging where the fence had once been broken. A new well, its promise of water and survival as vital as any deed or survey. Shovels bit into the hard ground, earth giving way in small mingles of grit and promise. As the first stars emerged, Clara glanced at Joey, who labored with small, determined strokes. The memory of her late husband and of Surveyor Banks intertwined in her mind, a flood of grief and gratitude. Yet here at the mouth of the new well, she allowed herself a rare smile, a hope woven from the collective strength of her son and her fake husband-turned-true partner. Night deepened around Pine Hollow Ranch, but inside the corral's circle of lantern light, the men and women shared silent pride. The final, battered note, "We'll stand," lay folded in Clara's pocket, a reminder that threats might arise again, but that they had the courage to face whatever came next. By dawn, the hole would be deeper, ready to reveal the life-sustaining waters hidden beneath Mesa's dusty facade. And in that ritual of digging, of turning earth and sweat into promise, Clara and Tom found a new partnership. One forged not in a legal bind of sham marriage, but in the shared labor of survival and the mutual recognition of each other's resilience. As the wind cut like knives over the ridge, and the barn's timbers sighed their ancient song, Clara Hayes and Tom Reed, with Joey's lullaby lingering on the crisp air, stood ready for the next chapter. Red Mesa Ranch, once teetering on the brink of foreclosure, now breathed with the slow pulse of renewal, its heart beating in the steady shovel's rhythm, guided by the quiet triumph of truth and the steadfast partnership born from necessity and tempered by understanding. Frost cracked under boots as dusk bled over the ridge, the thin light slicing through Arizona's chilly air. Clara Hayes paused beside the barn door, breath visible in ragged puffs, as hoofbeats approached on a hard-packed earth. The creditor's posse, 5 grim riders led by the scout rode into the corral with rifles unshouldered, their faces set in stubborn resolve. In that fragile moment, Red Mesa teetered between foreclosure and defiance, and Clara steeled herself for the final stand. Tom Reed stepped forward, lariat coiled at his waist, survey maps tucked inside his jacket. The scout swung down from his horse, drawing a folded stack of foreclosure papers. "You've drained my patience," the scout snapped, tossing the papers toward Clara. "Sign these, hand over the land." The rustle of parchment echoed like bones cracking, yet Clara's voice held steady. "We won't sign death warrant for truth," she said, retrieving Tom's survey from her pocket. "This map shows disputed lines. Your claim is void." Under the lantern's glow, Tom unfolded the oilskin chart, pointing to the arroyo's bend and the gnarled mesquite that had served as witness trees. "Banks' ledger-shifted markers," he explained. "But I staked true corners for both this ranch and the adjacent claim. You owe me a correction, not a foreclosure." His words carried the weight of years spent surveying rock and sand, and the creditor stiffened at the evidence laid bare. Crackling tension hung between them, like a rattlesnake poised to strike. One of the riders spat into the dust. "Maps lie as much as men," he growled. He lifted his rifle, finger poised on the trigger. But before violence could erupt, little Joey Hayes scrambled forward, clutching a lantern aloft. "Mama's right," he shouted, voice clear in a hush. "Show him the markers." The boy's innocence cut through the gloom. His impassioned plea punctuated the injustice and rallied Clara's allies. Clara nodded, voice soft but unyielding. "My son must inherit this land." She tapped the survey's esoteric symbols. "These markers preserve his future." Jed and the ranch hands, gathered behind her in grim solidarity, shifted into view, rifles slung but faces resolute. The posse exchanged wary glances, their resolve faltering before the united front of widow, cowboy, and boy. Suddenly, the scout's jaw tightened as memories flickered in his eyes. He studied Tom's face, recognition dawning. "Surveyor Reed, Banks' partner," he muttered, voice hoarse. "My brother was killed in that storm, fell from a ridge when markers shifted." His confession trembled on the wind, a confession that carried the weight of bitter history. "I blame men like you," he admitted, head bowed. Tom's expression softened. "I mourned him, too," he said quietly. "We both lost kin in that tempest." The admission, shared grief dissolved over Barnes' creaking boards, broke the final barrier of enmity. The posse lowered their weapons, uncertainty bleeding into relief. Clara's heart pounded as she watched old grievances unravel. In the dim light, the scout withdrew the foreclosure papers and stamped them with a rough flourish of repudiation. "We'll stand down," he declared, words carrying both resignation and a fragile peace. He pressed a final note into Clara's hand. "Our debt settle till next drought." His retreating horse hooves mirrored their earlier threat, now a muted promise rather than a march to ruin. Clara exhaled the weight she had carried since dusk's first tremor. She turned and slipped the scarf folded in her coat to the barn's foundation. There, with trembling fingers, she laid in a shallow mound of earth laced with mesquite leaves. The scarf, a talisman from her late husband, lay buried as a symbol of closure. Its fibers, once soaked with sorrow, now fed the promise of new roots in the soil. Under the moon's gentle glow, the ranch hands raised weathered voices in a vow of solidarity. Jed stepped forward, hand against the barn's rough planks. "Red Mesa endures," he proclaimed softly. "We rebuild," and rifles tapped barrels in solemn accord. The sound, once a prelude to violence, now rang with the quiet power of restored community. As the posse silhouettes dissolved into the night, Clara, Tom, Joey, and the ranch hands set to work reinforcing the corral and repairing the battered gate. Their hammer strikes and shouted encouragements composed a hopeful refrain against the silent plateau. Each nail driven, each board reset, stitched wounds in both land and spirit. Weeks later, in the autumn of 1885, Red Mesa Ranch bore little resemblance to the desperate homestead of 2 years before. Clara stood beside Tom and Joey at the edge of a newly dug well, a silent circle that glimmered in the soft dawn light. Their hands, weathered and calloused, guided the well's sturdy wooden frame into place. Sweat mingled with dust on their brows, their labors a testament to shared purpose rather than obligation. Joey, now taller, more confident, dropped the bucket into the well's gaping mouth. He hauled it up, brimming with clear, cool water. The sound of liquid striking was like a benediction, the life-giving essence that affirmed their triumph over drought, debt, and despair. Clara pressed her palm against the bucket's rim, inhaling the faint scent of earth and promise. Tom took a slow, deliberate sip, his gaze drifting across the ridge where once the creditor had threatened. "We did this," he said quietly, voice laced with gratitude and pride. His eyes met Clara's, a bridge of understanding forged in hardship and hope. Clara nodded, her scarce burial site hidden beneath fresh earth beside the well. "We've built more than a water source," she replied softly. "We've built a future." Her words carried the tender yet unflinching truth of a widow turned leader, a cowboy turned partner, and a boy turned heir of a resilient legacy. In the gentle dawn, as the first light caught Dusty grazing nearby, Clara, Tom, and Joey stood shoulder to shoulder. Their silhouettes formed a quiet testament to the partnership born of necessity, tempered by shared loss, and guided by the enduring spirit of the frontier. Red Mesa Ranch, once on the brink of collapse, now thrived on hope woven like threads through the arid earth. And as the wind stirred the prairie grass in a soft applause, the legacy of fake husband faded into something far richer, a bond of equals, bound by sweat, steadfastness, and the unspoken truth that real salvation comes not through pretense, but through the hard, honest work of standing together.